this album, Tom Waits' Rain Dogs. Now, can we say this is kind of unofficially... It feels like it's part of it feels like the middle part of the trilogy to me that starts with Swordfish Trombones and concludes with Frank's Wild Years. And it's got a bit of both, hasn't it? But it's also probably the most accessible and mainstream of those three.
It's still very willful. It's still avant-garde.
It's all relative.
He's one of those artists, isn't he?
Yeah.
You know, Tom Waits, how he's managed to shift so many units and be so successful. And of course, Rod Stewart covering one of the songs from this album must have helped.
What was the song again?
But
Downtown Train, yes.
Some of this stuff is more extreme than one of his influences, Captain Beefheart. And to take that to the toppermost of the poppermost in the mid-'80s,
and there's
quite a safe era.
And there's very little about it that sounds, that you could say would date it to 1985, is there? And I think that's the beauty about Tom Waits. He's always kind of existed outside, in a way, of the era he's been operating in. There's no 80s production techniques, is there, on this at all? At least not as I remember.
Not that I can remember. I was listening to it earlier, so nothing. And again, it kind of shifts. I mean, the one thing that he does very, very well is go from that kind of tender short story Randy Newman ballad into a complete noise fest, and then suddenly pull it out with quite an affecting kind of blues, jazz tinge.
Yeah, and the use of the junkyard percussion is on evidence again here.
I love the
in evidence
percussion,
again
and
here.
I love, is it Mark Rebo's guitar on it?
But then there are tracks like Downtown Train, which are, I can imagine Bruce Springsteen doing that. I could imagine Bruce Springsteen doing that.
But it's an outlier, isn't it? It's just that one song you can imagine.
No, there's a
Springsteen
few on
doing,
here.
maybe.
There's the track with Keith Richards on it as well. Again, I forgot. It's been a while since I listened to this record. Walk in Spanish. There's a few songs on here that you can imagine being on a Stones record or on a Bruce Springsteen record. But that's the beauty of Tom Waits. He doesn't sort of read from the same hymn book as everyone
else. Can you imagine the audience listening to Big Black Mariah or other pieces? Singapore.
Well, Singapore, yeah.
Because some of
Clap
this,
hands,
I'm just kind of wondering. It's 1985. Patrick Bateman.
Yeah.
He's bought it on the
Patrick
basis
Bateman wouldn't be, but Patrick Bateman would probably slaughter an extra couple of people just to make up for the fact
but
that
he's bought it on the
that.
basis of Downtown Train.
Yeah.
And then he's listening to Singapore.
Yeah, and he has to go out and
what happens is that when his mind fractures, could this be it? So it's extraordinarily brave for a huge mainstream success of the 80s, really. And you're right, it's that middle part of that early trilogy. Swordfish Trombones is probably my favourite. Frank's Wild Years is probably my least favourite, but it's the
maddest as well, isn't it? Frank's Wild Years.
The maddest, yeah.
And we admire it for that.
And I was going back, one of the earlier episodes, I think I was kind of playing devil's advocate and slightly damning ways. Because, when these albums came out, I was a massive fan. I discovered Swordfish Trombones around the time it came out. Absolutely adored it. This I absolutely adored, Frank's Wild Years. Then there came a certain point when him as the actor, because this is the thing, I think that he is an actor performing through the songs, that became an issue for me. And now I just think, well, he did it brilliantly and he found the soundscapes to match those stories. So I've kind of changed. It's this thing for me that I'm always amazed that music never changes, but our relationship with it does. So there are certain times when you can sometimes find yourself disconnected from it, or sometimes thinking, well, why did I ever like this? Or finding a fault. And it's funny, I'm more back in a Tom Waits mode. I think when we started off the album years, I was probably in my
You hated him when we started. You hated Tom Waits when we started the album years.
I did.
You hated him. You were always having a go at him. It was always down to me to No, that's not true. But I mean, it's interesting, is it? Because he is the outlier in the sense this is a 70s artist that's peaking in the 80s.
And he's peaking with his most extraordinary music.
Well, that's what I mean.
He's not making any concessions, because if you listen to his 70s music, especially the first couple, they're beautiful.
Amazing. All of them.
Albums, mostly quite ballad heavy. You'll still get the beat poetry excursions, you'll still get that kind of 50s jazz influence, but mostly he's writing classic ballads that the Eagles could and indeed did cover. Great ballads, and he's got a relatively straight voice at that point as well. But they're great albums. So at the point when he's making his most, you'd have thought, because again, he would have been the ultimate early to mid-70s singer-songwriter who should have broken big around the time of Hotel California, and he didn't.
Because by that time he was making albums like Blue Valentine.
That's 78, wasn't it?
Which is a kind of a little... When is Hotel California then?
76.
Never knowingly owned an Eagles album in my life, to be fair. But I mean, he's like you say, he's kind of peaking in the 80s, making his most extraordinary music, and that puts him on a very, very short list indeed, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Very short list
He's
indeed.
making no concessions to
Yeah.
80s production, no concessions to 80s commercialism, because, when we talk about Downtown Train and these tracks that could have been Springsteen, this was always a part of his work. In fact, this was mostly what he started doing, making these songs that could have been covered on Nebraska.